Oh, the Disneyland Resort. 2 epic theme parks full of people kicking off their summer vacation right.
Look at all these happy people.
Look at all these happy mice.
Everyone around me looks so excited to be here.
Now, most people are undoubtedly excited about the still brand spanking new Pixar Pier.
How can you blame them, right? It's fresh.
It's exciting.
It's full of wonderful Pixar characters. No wonder everybody out here stoked.
I am also very excited to be out here today, but my excitement has nothing to do with the new Pixar Pier.
New Disney stuff is exciting. It's great. It's awesome.
But as much as new things opening up in Disney parks are exciting,
I've got to be honest with you, I've always been a lot more excited about old things in the Disney parks.
And today I'm especially excited to be back at Walt Disney's original Magic Kingdom,
Disneyland.
Some of you no doubt have heard me tell this story before,
But a big part of why I've always loved Disneyland
is that in 1957, just 2 years after the park opened,
my grandparents and their oldest daughter, my Aunt Tina, moved to Anaheim.
literally just about across the street from the brand new park.
And so for my mom's whole life, my aunts, my uncle,
And of course, all my early years too, Disneyland was literally right in our backyard.
so it's always had a special place in my heart. You know, feels like home.
I've always been fascinated by Disneyland history, so of course I've always wondered what it was like for my grandparents to walk around this park in the 1950s.
And I am so excited to be here today.
Because now I finally know.
Just a few days ago, I was visiting my Aunt Tina, and I found treasure.
I found a huge treasure trove of old slides.
You know, like old slide projector slides.
And I thought, what the heck? Maybe I should take these slides somewhere to have them converted into digital images.
I knew that most of the slides were from the 1950s.
Mostly from back in St. Louis.
But I kinda hoped just a little bit.
that I might find at least 1 or 2 old Disneyland pictures.
And I did, and not just 1 or 2.
But so far, and I've only scratched the surface, I've found 15 old school pictures
of my grandparents and my aunt here at Disneyland.
between 1957 and 1960.
As you can imagine, as a fan of old school 1950s Disneyland, I am so stoked that my wish
Just came true.
and I knew that today I had to come back to Disneyland to share my excitement with all of you and do a little Disneyland time traveling.
First stop, Fantasyland.
Now these were the pictures I was the most excited about because Fantasyland of the 1950s
Looked absolutely nothing like it looks today.
the Fantasyland that we're standing in here over 60 years later
Was all completely rebuilt and remodeled back in 1983. This here,
is all the original new Fantasyland.
instead of all these elaborately themed fantasy-looking buildings that we see now,
What you would have seen in the 50s and 60s
were the castle walls extending out to either side. As a matter of fact, you can still see them up there behind Peter Pan. See them?
well, those went all the way back on either side of Fantasyland.
And technically they're still up there, but now they're covered by themed buildings like Mr. Toad's Mansion.
Where back then, protruding from the castle walls
Would have been these medieval jousting-looking tent-like structures.
that were much more simple looking.
This whole area behind the castle was also a lot more crowded.
Because right about where we're standing between Peter Pan and Snow White over here
Is where the carousel used to sit.
That's right, that giant carousel used to be wedged over here.
In this very narrow space between the rides.
Then behind that, where the carousel sits now,
Is where the teacups used to be.
so the carousel used to be up there by the castle. The teacups used to be where the carousel is now.
And then behind the carousel, where Dumbo sits today,
Was a big pond with a pirate ship in it.
that's right, right here where we're looking today was the lagoon with the pirate ship. And back then,
It was known as the Chicken of the Sea pirate ship.
it was located right about here. And it was known as the Chicken of the Sea pirate ship because Chicken of the Sea tuna was an early sponsor of Disneyland, and inside of the restaurant on board the pirate ship,
They served up quite a few tuna fish dishes.
a look at the menu reveals tuna clipper salad, tuna boat salad, tuna pie pastry salad, tuna burger, tuna sandwich, and even 15-cent
Milk! Hopefully not tuna flavored.
Wow, shrimp cocktail was only 95 cents.
That's a heck of a deal.
Anyway, the same year I was born, in 1980, 1983, they removed the Chicken of the Sea pirate ship.
So I never got to experience it, although all my relatives always talked about it.
So I've always been a little fascinated about the pirate ship that once was.
Which is why I'm super stoked that the first old Disneyland slide that I found in that collection was of the old pirate ship.
Now, like I said, the back of the pirate ship would have been about here, and it pointed this way, so the front was roughly over here.
Which means that this angle on Dumbo is roughly
the same spot from which my grandma took this picture. Check this out. It's the side of the pirate ship, even showing the side entrance there. And up on top, it's kind of hard to tell, but there's my grandpa with his friends, the Randazzos.
Now, if the writing on the actual slide is correct, that picture is from 1957.
That would be the same exact year my grandparents first moved here. This whole park was still brand spanking new, and the picture was taken right here. Boy, that is very, very different looking from the back of Fantasyland that we know today, huh?
This next picture, which I think is from a little later, is also labeled 1957.
And also shows the old Chicken of the Sea pirate ship.
Sort of in the back corner of the little lagoon, the little pond that the pirate ship was in, there's this weird little cutout shape.
You can see it on the old Disneyland map.
It was sort of near to the back of the pirate ship, somewhere in this area, and there was a bench right there.
Where the next slide, taken from roughly this angle here, shows my grandmother and my aunt, who's very, very young, so back in the 50s, sitting in the shade of the umbrella right near the back of the Chicken of the Sea pirate ship.
A couple of things I noticed when I looked closely at this picture.
You can see the cool little gangway in the far back of the pirate ship, obviously before they built the Skull Rock Lagoon back there, so very early in the park's history. There's a lot of other little picnic benches back there where you can eat your tuna, and up in the foreground to the right of the bench my grandma's sitting on, you can see someone's exposed cigarette right there by the children.
It was a different time back then. People were smoking everywhere out here.
As a matter of fact, even when I was a kid, people were walking around Fantasyland smoking cigarettes.
Disneyland doesn't always smell perfect, but I gotta tell you, it smells a lot better today, a lot fresher.
Now, these photos are from two separate trips to Disneyland, so I don't know if they were munching on tuna on either trip.
I always wondered what it looked like from up on top of that pirate ship where they were standing in the one picture.
And luckily, the Daveland website has me covered. Check that out. That's what it looked like from up on top. That is awesome. All right, I don't want to slow down too much. Remember how I was saying where the carousel is now?
It's sort of roughly where the Teacups used to be?
Well, it turns out we've got a Teacups picture too. Oh my gosh. Check that out.
That picture was taken right here, roughly.
In the background, you can just see the nose of the Chicken of the Sea pirate ship. You can see Monstro back there, and you can see the old lighthouse in its original location.
Now, this one's going to be more or less impossible to precisely match up, mostly because the Teacups were sitting right in here where the carousel is and the line is.
But using Monstro as my guide, it would have lined up roughly something kind of like this, only taken from a little further back. You can see in the photograph the little lighthouse for the Storybook Land canal boats. That lighthouse no longer sits directly in front of Monstro's mouth like in the photo, but it
just moved a little further down.
It was originally the ticket booth for riding this ride.
And it's almost impossible to tell now, but back then, just a little off center here,
was a little window where you could buy tickets to ride on Storybook Land, just right in this sort of area here.
They don't use tickets anymore, but it's pretty cool that they kept that thing.
Now, since the 1950s, Monstro has had one heck of a facelift, as I demonstrated in a different Disneyland Now and Then video, but the rockwork near him seems to be pretty much the same.
So Monstro's more or less one of the only things in Fantasyland that's never moved.
You can see Dumbo is right where the pirate ship used to be, and what strikes me most about this picture is look how all the trees have completely grown up from then to now. Whoa boy, and of course the Dumbo queue is now pretty much covering up Monstro from this angle.
But that is so cool, the 1950s Teacups right here!
And my grandma and my aunt are sitting inside one of them. You can tell they look quite a bit different from the modern Teacups, but it's still pretty much the same thing. All right, now because we've been talking around the carousel here, I don't want to ignore it.
I've got to tell you, I was also very excited to find some old school carousel pictures.
Now the carousel has existed in one form or another since 1922 when it was first operating up in Canada.
Walt Disney removed the other animals and added more horses.
And later on they had to replace this roof up here and do a few paint jobs, of course.
But broadly speaking, for the most part, part, it's the same ride it's always been.
And in the 1950s, when it used to sit up there at that very narrow choke point,
My aunt and my grandpa went for a ride.
and they've got the pictures to prove it. Look at that. That's the carousel in the 1950s. And look at the horse my Aunt Tina's sitting on.
That's not just any carousel horse, that's Jingles, the one with the bells all over him.
The one that many Disney urban legends say was Mrs. Disney's personal favorite carousel horse, to the point where it was even used in the movie Saving Mr. Banks.
What a coincidence, Disneyland's most famous carousel horse.
Now, as you can see, the Jingles of yesteryear has a much different paint job than the Jingles of today. But not just because the whole carousel has been repainted, but because for the 50th anniversary of Disneyland, Jingles got the sweet upgrade, being, you know, one of the original rides in the park. There's also a lot of Mary Poppins references on there, which is fitting given that Jingles was also dedicated to Julie Andrews in 2008, so another Mary Poppins connection. That's why the J.A. on the saddle, huh?
That is just so cool to have a picture of Jingles from 1957, question mark, maybe 58?
It's kind of hard to tell because this isn't a place that they only visited once or twice on vacation. I mean, they lived literally across the street, so they came quite often. It was very cheap to get in the gate, and pretty cheap if you only rode one or two rides and were paying per ticket.
I believe in 1955 the carousel was an A ticket, which I'm pretty sure was only 10 cents or so.
Who wouldn't want to come across the street and ride Jingles for only 10 cents, huh? I love that you can see my grandpa peeking up from behind and having a good time in Fantasyland. But wait, that's not all. There's even more slides of fun in Fantasyland.
It gets a little confusing knowing that picture of the carousel was actually taken over there, and then the teacups were actually right here, and the chicken of the sea was where Dumbo was.
And in the 50s, Dumbo the Flying Elephant was actually located right over here.
Before 1983.
There was no Pinocchio Village House Restaurant, or Red Rose Tavern as it's still called at the moment.
This whole area here in the 50s was a dead end.
From this spot over here, you could take the Skyway to Tomorrowland, you know, the old sky bucket rides that went out across the park.
But the main attraction back in this area was Dumbo the Flying Elephant, and it was right back here, right in this area. As best as I can tell from satellite photos and everything, this right here, this seating area was basically the site of the flying elephant, Dumbo himself.
See right up there where the original castle-style wall ends before the new school village house building built in 1983? That and that curve over there from Casey Jr. Those are the two landmarks that Dumbo was halfway in between, which means right in this area
was the location of not one, but two different slides from the 1950s.
They look nearly identical, but check out these two slides. These ones are fantastic. Notice those bare castle walls up behind them? That was those walls right there before they were all Pinocchio'd out, leading down back this way. Behind them was a big fence
that, if you look very carefully, was covered with attraction posters, which is pretty cool.
Yes, sir, that was the end of Fantasyland, the dead end, and in later map photos, you can see the dead end was right past the old exit stairs to the Skyway to Fantasyland, which are still located right here, getting covered up with bushes behind this tent. So that means the old dead end wall was somewhere right through here along towards the restrooms that are now in Fantasyland.
And if you look very carefully in those pictures of Dumbo,
in one of them you can just see the very edge of the roof of an old souvenir stand, all themed out with that old sort of circus tent theme.
I've seen it drawn on old maps before, but I've never actually seen a photo of any part of it, so that's pretty cool.
Also in the background behind these very handsome cast members, you can also see the old payphones, which would have been located along a wall somewhere right near those restrooms, between there and the door to the old village house, somewhere in here.
Like I said, very difficult to line up these days because they added a little bit to this building.
But of course now all the walls and the corners and landmarks are all completely different.
But roughly here in this seating area, over 60 years ago,
my grandma was snapping fun pics of my grandpa and my aunt riding the original Dumbo. And look at that. You can really see the arms that are holding the elephants are completely different than the ones today, a lot thinner looking.
And that's because, like I've said a few times before,
the entire old school Dumbo ride was actually replaced when they built New Fantasyland. So these aren't technically the same exact ride vehicles, but I still think it is pretty darn cool that you could ride Dumbo back in the 1950s and then come and ride it today.
Like, how cool is it that you can bring your kid to ride the very same ride, sort of?
But your grandfather was coming across the street to bring his kids to ride, huh? huh? It's like a family tradition.
Disneyland is deep in my blood.
One big difference you can clearly see between the old Dumbo and the modern Dumbo, though, is that the original Dumbo had ears that flapped. Look at the hinge right there for the ears to flap. That's amazing. Oh, and speaking of Casey Jr., just before I forget, I have one other picture of this area of Fantasyland overlooking the Storybook Land Canal and a little bit of the track from Casey Jr. And you can really tell that photo was taken right here, right before you load on Casey Jr., because still to this day, the plants match up. Remember, this picture was taken roughly 1957, at least that's what it says on the slide. And it's amazing to think that all these years later, the plants really line up. If it really was 1957, that means that in the slide I have, these plants were only a year old, because the first year Disneyland opened, the Storybook Land Canal was pretty much the mud ride. All that colorful landscaping and the models were added a year later.
The first year, it was just known as the Canal Boats of the World.
But once they added all those storybook features, of course, it became Storybook Land, and it's been that way ever since. Check that out, and then check out 1957. What a trip, huh?
What a trip!
All right, I've been taking a little too long in Fantasyland.
But I've got two more pictures that are pretty awesome.
Both of which were taken over here at Peter Pan's flight. Check this out. Look at this picture. That is the original 1950s Peter Pan ride vehicle. And that's my grandpa and my aunt getting ready for a flight to Neverland. How awesome is that?
Now, the ride vehicles have been replaced with sturdier versions since the 1950s.
And of course, even that fabulous backdrop behind them as you load into the ride has been refreshed over the years.
Now, this is more or less the same attraction they rode back then, and you can get pretty much the same picture of people if you wait in line in just the right spot. How epic is that? I should explain, though, that where this old slide was taken is now incorporated into the ride. That first nursery scene you go into used to be open to the open air, as you can see in these other pictures from the 1950s of the original Peter Pan before the 1983 refurbishment. So it's impossible to line up exactly, but, you know, still pretty much the same thing.
That's a pretty fantastic old school Peter Pan picture.
But I've got one more Peter Pan old school Fantasyland picture that I like even better.
Right here in this spot, just in front of Peter Pan, just where you can peek in and see the ride vehicles loading. Basically about where these bushes are now.
My grandpa and my aunt got a fun Peter Pan pic
with none other than the dastardly Captain Hook. Wow, take a look at that. First of all, look at the background there. You can really tell that the face of the ride, the face of the building, completely changed.
And that's not the only face that's changed. Look at Captain Hook.
Whoa, that is one old school looking Captain Hook mug, huh?
Hey Hook, look! It's you with my aunt in the 50s. He looks good for his age.
Why won't you return her calls, Hook?
That Hook, such a player.
Well, old Captain Hook may have had a little work done, but you know what? Who can blame him? He's looking fantastic. No judgment here.
But another thing I love about this old school picture is you can see the old-timey Fantasyland trash cans.
That apparently used to have hats, just like those ones at Walt Disney World by their castle.
Hey, that was in my 5 Weird Things video from there, remember?
Speaking of all this, if you think that old school Hook is cool, check out this old Disneyland postcard. There was a croc walking around Fantasyland too. Oh boy, that's scary. Look at that, that's all behind the pirate ship once it became Captain Hook's restaurant and they had a Skull Rock Lagoon. Long since gone, my friends. Long since gone. Pretty epic, phenomenal, old school Fantasyland then and now pictures in the slides. I am so happy.
I actually have a few more old school 50s Disneyland slides that I want to show you.
But I didn't think it would take so long to show you the ones I already showed you today.
So I guess I'll have to save those for next time. Plus, we're still scanning more slides. I might find even more.
So I think for the moment, this is where we're gonna stop.
But you know what? What trip to Disneyland would be complete without a picture in front of the castle?
And it's not just us modern folk that think that way. My grandparents were thinking that way too.
And so for our very last then and now picture, I'll show you a slide taken right here
of my grandpa and my aunt right in front of Sleeping Beauty Castle.
Isn't that awesome? That's from the 50s.
Well, awesome and a little bit funny because you can tell my grandma was handed the camera and she didn't really get the best picture of the castle, huh? Kind of a little off to the side and a little low there.
Showing a little more of the ground that's necessary and not so much of the top of the castle, huh?
Well, that's okay. Not everyone's born a photographer.
I just think that is so special and so cool. A picture of my grandpa standing right about here with my aunt back in the 50s. I always knew that Disneyland was a big part of why they chose this neighborhood.
But even among all the old pictures of my family, it's very rare to see Disneyland pictures, you know? It just wasn't as special to them.
Since it was right across the street as it was to maybe other people who drove from Ohio or wherever, you know what I mean?
But I had never seen these slides from the 50s, back when they first pretty much moved into the neighborhood, when they were still super stoked on Disneyland.
It's very special to me because the whole rest of the neighborhood, the whole rest of Anaheim around Disneyland has completely changed.
My grandparents' house is still standing, but if you compare this picture of the 1950s to how it looks today, you can see it's almost a completely different house. It's just so different.
And unless they somehow came up with $1 million to buy that property back, it's unlikely I'll ever get to go back to that property and be nostalgic, you know?
But Disneyland will hopefully always be here.
It's a place I can still come to and stand right where my grandfather stood.
A place I can still come to and reminisce about the old days with my own dad and my own mom here.
Not to mention all the memories I've already created here with my own son and with my fiance, meeting her here.
Who, by the way, just showed up. Probably wants to have lunch with me, huh? Ooh. So I hope you enjoyed time traveling with me here at Disneyland. And I hope it explains a little bit better why, to me, Disneyland will always be home. All right, guys, make sure to check out all the links down below. It's got all kinds of rad stuff, merchandise, and how you can support and all that neat stuff. Places where you can get things like these sweet patches. Plus, make sure to subscribe. Click that weird little bell icon so you can find out about our further adventures. We're taking a little road trip soon. And we'll see you guys next time in Randomland.
You've done your duty. You can go home and sleep well.
If you have sweet old school pictures of Disneyland or the Magic Kingdom in Florida or something like that that you'd like to share with me, we could use in videos, you can email me through the website justinscar.com. Got some more sweet pins coming up. So many sweet road trips. Smash the like button, bro. Smash the comment, bro. Subscribe, bro.
I hate being a commercial,
but I have to let them know. Let them know. Let you know. Duck, duck, goose. See what I did there? Duck, duck. Duck, duck, goose. You like that, Mr. Goose? He doesn't really, not a fan. That's okay. He doesn't have to subscribe.
you've done your duty. You can go home and
wish upon a star.
No, you've done your duty. You can go home and
wishing well. No.
You've done your duty. You can go home and play with your Play-Doh.
I don't know what
You've done your duty. You can go home and sleep well.
I did it.
Good job.
Oh, I did it. Whew.